My name is Margaret Lawson. I am 62 years old, a retired elementary school librarian from Columbus, Ohio, and I never imagined that the biggest betrayal of my life wouldn't come from a stranger, but from my own daughter. Before you decide who's right or wrong, hear me out. And if stories about real families, real mistakes, and real consequences matter to you, make sure you subscribe, because what I'm about to share could happen to anyone. I bought my home in 1994 with my husband, Daniel. Back then, interest rates were higher, money was tight, and we scraped together every dollar for that down payment. Daniel worked construction. I worked full-time at the school library. We skipped vacations. We drove the same old Chevy for 13 years. This house wasn't inherited, it wasn't gifted, it was earned. We raised our daughter, Emily, here. She learned to walk in the living room. She practiced piano in the dining room. When she left for college, I stood in the driveway and cried after her car disappeared down the street. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then Daniel passed away 8 years ago. Sudden heart attack. No warning. One day he was mowing the lawn. The next, I was planning a funeral. The silence after that was heavy. If you've ever lost a spouse, you know the house doesn't just feel empty. It feels haunted by memories. So, when Emily started coming by more often about 2 years ago, I felt grateful. She brought groceries, fixed the porch railing, helped me organize paperwork. "Mom, you shouldn't have to handle everything alone," she'd say. And I believed her, because when you're over 60 and living alone, help feels like love. If you relate to that, subscribe, because sometimes what looks like care isn't what it seems. One afternoon, Emily sat at my kitchen table and said, casually, "Mom, have you done any estate planning?" I laughed. "I'm not planning on going anywhere." She smiled. "It's just smart. Probate can be a nightmare. I don't want the state taking forever with your house." That sentence stuck. I'd heard horror stories about probate, legal fees, frozen assets, months of court delays. She started mentioning it more often. "It would just be easier if my name was added to the deed. You'd still live here. It's just protection." Protection. That word made it sound responsible, like we were being proactive. She even printed articles online showing how joint tenancy avoids probate. Looking back, I see how carefully it was presented. But at the time, it felt practical, safe. If you've ever trusted family without question, keep listening. A few weeks later, she brought paperwork. "It's simple, Mom. We just add me as joint tenant. Nothing changes." Her husband's cousin was a notary. They came over one evening. We signed at the dining room table. I skimmed it. I didn't read every clause. Why would I? She's my daughter. I signed. And just like that, something shifted. But I didn't feel it yet. Over the next month, Emily started talking differently. "When you eventually downsize, if we ever sold, the equity in this neighborhood is crazy right now. Downsize. Sell." We had never discussed selling. One Saturday, she brought up renovating the kitchen. It would boost resale value. Resale value. I felt a tiny knot in my stomach, but I brushed it aside, because the alternative, believing your own child might have ulterior motives, is terrifying. If you've ever ignored the gut feeling because the truth was too uncomfortable, subscribe. You're going to understand what comes next. Then came the phone call. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard her voice downstairs. She thought I was out in the yard. She was on speaker. "Yeah, Once it's fully processed, it's basically half mine. If she resists selling later, we'll figure it out. My hands went cold. Half mine. Resist selling. We'll figure it out. My heart pounded so loud I thought she might hear it upstairs. That night, I barely slept. Was I overreacting? Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she meant something else. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A week later, a letter arrived from the county recorder's office, addressed to both of us, Margaret Lawson and Emily Carter. Official confirmation, joint tenants with right of survivorship. But there was more. The document clearly stated that either tenant could seek partition or for sale under certain conditions. For sale, my breath caught. I called a real estate attorney the next morning. I sat in his office clutching the paperwork like it might burn me. He read it carefully. Then he looked at me and said, "Mrs. Lawson, you've essentially given your daughter equal ownership. If she pushes for a sale, this could become complicated. Very complicated." I felt sick. "Can I reverse it?" He paused. "Not without her cooperation." That's when it hit me. I didn't just add her name for estate planning. I gave away control. I drove home shaking. 31 years in this house. Every payment made. Every repair handled. And now I legally shared ownership with someone who might not have my best interest at heart. When Emily came over that evening, I asked her directly, "Are you planning to sell my house?" She froze. Then she laughed. "Mom, don't be dramatic." Dramatic. That word hurt more than anything, because it meant she was dismissing my fear. And that's when I realized something painful. The betrayal wasn't just legal, it was emotional. If this is hitting close to home, make sure you subscribe, because what happened next escalated in ways I never imagined. That was just the beginning, because 2 weeks later, I received something in the mail that confirmed my worst fear. And when I confronted Emily with it, the mask finally slipped. Next, I'll tell you about the offer she made behind my back, and the moment I understood that I was no longer just her mother. I was an obstacle. Stay with me. 2 weeks after I spoke to the attorney, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't from the county. It was from a real estate investor. "Dear Margaret and Emily," both our names again. The letter stated they had been informed that the property might be available for purchase. They were offering a fast cash closing. My vision blurred. I had never listed my home, never contacted a realtor, never spoken to an investor, so how did they know? There's only one way. "Emily." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I signed the papers, and read the letter 3 times. Cash offer. Quick closing. Flexible move-out timeline. Move out. They were already assuming I'd leave. My chest tightened. You know that moment when denial finally collapses, when the little excuses you've been making in your head just fall apart. That was mine. If you've ever realized too late that you were being maneuvered, you know the exact kind of nausea I'm talking about. Subscribe if you believe instincts are usually right the first time. I called Emily immediately. She didn't answer. I texted her a picture of the letter. 5 minutes later, she called. Her tone was calm. Too calm. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom. I was just exploring options." Exploring options. For what? I asked. Silence. Then she sighed. "Mom, this house is worth almost $480,000 right now. You don't need all this space. Think about what we could do with that money. We, not you. Not what you could do, we." I felt my throat tighten. This isn't about we. It's my home. It's legally mine too. she said, and that was the first time she said it without softening her voice. Legally mine too. The words echoed in my head long after we hung up. That night, I barely ate. I walked from room to room, touched the walls. Daniel painted and stood in Emily's old bedroom. This house wasn't just property, it was history, memory, security, and suddenly, it felt unstable. If you're over 60, you understand how important stability becomes. You don't want drama. You don't want chaos. You want peace. Instead, I had tension, and it was coming from my own child. A few days later, Emily came over alone, no kids, no cheerful energy. She sat down and got straight to the point. Mom, we're struggling. That was new. She explained that her husband had invested in a business that failed. They had credit card debt, medical bills from their youngest surgery. I listened, my heart softened. Because I'm a mother. When your child says they're struggling, your instinct isn't suspicion, it's protection. I would help you, I said. You didn't need to go behind my back. She looked at me carefully. It's not behind your back. It's planning. This house is an asset. You're sitting on equity that could change our lives. Our lives again. You're asking me to give up my home, I said quietly. You could move into a condo. Something smaller. Easier to manage. Easier to manage. Like I was incapable. Like I was already declining. And something inside me snapped. Did you add your name because you were worried about probate? Or because you wanted leverage? Her eyes hardened. It's not leverage. It's reality. That's when I realized something chilling. She wasn't emotional about this. She was strategic. If you think financial stress can turn love into calculation, subscribe. Because what she did next proves it. 3 days later, I received notice from a mediation service. Emily had contacted a legal mediator to discuss options regarding jointly owned property. I couldn't believe it. She was escalating. Without talking to me first, I called my attorney again. He didn't sound surprised. Unfortunately, this happens more than you think, he said. Adult children convincing parents to add them to deeds, then pushing for sale. How does this end? I asked. Usually, with family relationships damaged, sometimes permanently. That word, permanently, hit hard. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my daughter. Or maybe, she had already decided I wasn't worth protecting. The mediation meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I sat in that sterile office across from Emily. A stranger in a blazer explained our options. Sell and split proceeds. Buy one party out. Or pursue partition in court. Partition in court. This wasn't family anymore. This was business. Emily leaned forward. We just need liquidity, Mom. You're not thinking about the future. I am thinking about the future. I said. Mine? The mediator asked if we could compromise. Emily suggested. If Mom gives us $150,000 from a refinance, we'll agree not to push a sale. Refinance at 62. On a house I finally owned outright after paying it off. My hands trembled. It wasn't about probate. It wasn't about protection. It was about access to money. And she had positioned herself perfectly. If this is making your stomach turn, subscribe. Because what I decided next shocked everyone in that room. I asked for a private moment with my attorney, and in that moment, I had to make a decision. Protect my home, or protect my relationship with my daughter. Because I knew, whichever path I chose, something would break. Next. I'll tell you the choice I made. and the legal move that completely blindsided Emily. Was I heartless? Or was I finally standing up for myself? You tell me. When I stepped outside the mediation room with my attorney, I felt physically ill. I don't want to lose her, I told him. He looked at me calmly. Mrs. Lawson, with respect, she's already willing to leverage you financially. The question isn't whether you'll lose her. The question is whether you'll lose your security. That sentence hit me hard. Security at 62. Security is everything. You don't get do-overs. You don't rebuild from scratch easily. You protect what you've built. I don't want to refinance, I said firmly. Then you have one strategic option, he replied. He explained something I didn't know. Since the transfer was recent, and since it could be argued that I signed under incomplete understanding or misrepresentation, we could challenge the deed in court. Fraud? Maybe not. But undue influence? Possibly. Especially if we could show she initiated legal mediation quickly afterward for financial gain. It wouldn't be easy. It would get ugly. And it would absolutely destroy whatever fragile trust remained. I stood there in silence for a long moment. Then I said something I never thought I'd say about my own child. Violet. When we walked back into the room, Emily looked confident. Until my attorney spoke. My client will not refinance or sell. Additionally, we intend to pursue legal review of the deed transfer. The color drained from her face. What? She said sharply. The mediator looked surprised. Emily turned toward me. You're taking me to court. I'm protecting myself, I replied. Her voice rose. You signed willingly. I signed believing you were protecting me, not positioning yourself. Her jaw tightened, and in that moment, I saw something that broke my heart. Not guilt, anger. If you've ever seen entitlement replace gratitude, you know how painful that is. Subscribe if you believe parents are not retirement plans. The weeks that followed were the most stressful of my life. Emily stopped bringing the kids over, stopped calling, stopped texting, silence, except through lawyers. Her attorney argued I understood the document, that I had full capacity, that I signed voluntarily, and technically, I had. I wasn't senile. I wasn't forced. But context matters. The timing of her investor outreach, the mediation push, the refinance demand, it painted a picture. And judges look at patterns still. Nothing was guaranteed. Every night, I lay awake replaying memories of her childhood. Did I raise her wrong? Did I spoil her? Did I make her feel entitled? Or was financial pressure reshaping her values? I kept asking myself if I should just give her the money. It would be easier, peaceful. But at what cost? If I refinanced and something happened to my health, I'd be in debt again at 62. That's not smart. That's fear-driven. And I was done making decisions from fear. If you're learning to choose strength over guilt, subscribe. This is the hard part no one talks about. 3 months later, the preliminary hearing came. Sitting across from Emily in that courtroom was surreal. She wouldn't look at me. Her attorney presented her as concerned, proactive, financially stressed, but practical. My attorney presented me as misled by emotional trust and pressured by urgency. The judge listened carefully, then asked one question that changed everything. Mrs. Carter, when did you first contact the investor? Emily hesitated. Shortly after the deed recorded. And when did you initiate mediation? About a month later. The judge leaned back. So your concern was probate avoidance, but your actions immediately focused on liquidation? Silence. That silence was louder than any argument. If you believe truth exposes itself under pressure, subscribe. We didn't get a final ruling that day, but the judge ordered temporary restriction. No sale, no refinancing, no forced action until further review day. It wasn't a victory, but it was protection outside the courthouse. Emily finally spoke to me directly. You're choosing a house over your family. Her words sliced deep. No, I said quietly. I'm choosing not to be manipulated. She shook her head. You've changed. Maybe I had. Or maybe I finally saw clearly. Over the next month, something unexpected happened. Her husband's business partner filed for bankruptcy. Financial records surfaced. And during discovery, we learned something that stunned me. Emily had already calculated potential sale profits in spreadsheets, with estimated distribution amounts, before I ever signed the deed. Before she brought the notary, she had run numbers, projected timelines, drafted options. This wasn't spontaneous financial desperation. It was planning, calculated, strategic. When my attorney showed me those documents, I felt two emotions at once: devastation and clarity. If you think betrayal hurts more when it's premeditated, you're right. Subscribe if you believe sometimes clarity is painful but necessary. At the next hearing, those documents were presented. The judge's tone shifted. Intent matters, pattern matters, and suddenly, the case didn't look like a simple family disagreement. It looked like potential exploitation. But here's where things get complicated. Because right before the judge was ready to move toward formal reversal of the deed, Emily did something I never expected, something that forced me to question everything again. Asterisk ahead. I'll tell you what she revealed, and the decision that left me crying in my driveway at 10 p.m. Was I too harsh? Or not harsh enough? Asterisk. If you've been following this story, you know by now this wasn't just about property, it was about trust, control, fear, and pride. If you believe family conflict is rarely black and white, subscribe, because what happened next changed the entire direction of this fight. The day before the next court appearance, Emily asked to meet, not with lawyers, not at mediation, just the two of us. She suggested we meet at the park where Daniel used to take her when she was little. I almost said no, but something in her voice sounded different. Tired, not defensive, just tired. When I arrived, she was already sitting on the bench near the playground. For a moment, I saw my little girl again. Not the woman who brought investors into my life, just my child. She didn't waste time. I didn't plan this to hurt you, she said quietly. I stayed silent, because I'd heard explanations before. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. We're deeper in debt than I told you. She explained that her husband's business didn't just fail. It collapsed. They had taken out a second mortgage, maxed credit cards, borrowed from friends, and then, on top of it, her youngest needed a follow-up surgery that insurance didn't fully cover. They were drowning. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked. Her voice cracked. Because I didn't want you to think we were irresponsible. So, instead, she tried to reposition my home as a solution, strategically, quietly, without confrontation. If you think pride can make people choose manipulation over vulnerability, subscribe. Because this is where it gets complicated. Asterisk. I ran the numbers before you signed, she admitted. There it was. Out loud. I thought, if we added my name, we'd have options. I didn't think you'd fight it. Didn't think I'd fight it. That hurt more than anything. You didn't think I'd protect myself? I asked. She looked down. I thought you'd sacrifice. You always have. And that sentence hit me like a brick. She wasn't wrong. I had always sacrificed, worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, put her needs before mine for 34 years. Somewhere along the line, that became expectation, and expectation became entitlement. If you're a parent, this part might sting. Subscribe if you believe love and boundaries have to coexist. I wasn't trying to steal from you, she said. You were trying to leverage me, I replied calmly. She didn't argue. Instead, she started crying, not dramatic crying, real crying. The kind that comes from exhaustion and fear. I'm scared, Mom, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. And in that moment, something shifted inside me, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Understanding doesn't erase betrayal, but it explains it. Then she said something that changed everything. If you drop the case, I'll sign the house back fully to you. I looked at her carefully. Why now? Because if this goes further, the judge could label it exploitation. That could affect my job, our reputation, everything. So part of her motivation was fear of consequences. But part of it, I could see, was realization. She hadn't expected me to stand firm. She hadn't expected resistance. She thought guilt would work. And when it didn't, she panicked. If you believe sometimes strength teaches lessons love alone cannot, subscribe. That night, I sat alone in my driveway for almost an hour. The oak tree Daniel planted swayed gently in the wind. I thought about my options. Continue the case, win decisively, and possibly fracture our relationship permanently, or drop the legal escalation, regain the house, and attempt to rebuild. Neither option was clean. Neither option felt victorious. But life rarely gives you neat endings. I called my attorney the next morning. I want a full deed reversal, I said. Signed, notarized, recorded. Then I'll withdraw. He agreed, but only if everything was legally airtight. 3 days later, we met at his office. Emily signed the reversal paperwork. This time, I read every line, every clause, every word. When the final document was stamped and recorded, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Ownership, not just of my home, of my boundaries. But here's the thing. Getting the house back didn't magically repair everything. Emily didn't hug me afterward. She didn't apologize dramatically. She simply said, I'm sorry it went this far. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't cinematic, it was real, and real is messy. If you think reconciliation is more complex than people admit, subscribe. In the weeks that followed, she slowly started bringing the kids by again. Short visits at first, then longer ones. We didn't talk about the case. We didn't talk about the spreadsheets. But something fundamental had changed. She no longer spoke about we when referencing my property. She no longer reviewed my bills. She no longer suggested downsizing. And I no longer felt naive. But here's what you don't know yet. Because while the house situation resolved, there was still one decision I had to make. One that would determine whether this pattern ever repeated. Next. I'll tell you the boundary I put in place, and whether I truly forgave her, or simply chose peace. Was I too harsh? Or did I finally teach the right lesson? If you were in my place, what would you have done? My name is Margaret Lawson. I'm 62 years old, and I got my house back. But here's the truth no one talks about. Winning legally doesn't mean you automatically win emotionally. If you've stayed with me this far, you know my daughter added herself to my deed, tried to push a sale, and only reversed it when court pressure mounted. The house is fully mine again. But trust doesn't get re-recorded at the county office. If you believe forgiveness and boundaries are not the same thing, subscribe, because this final part is the most important lesson of all. After the deed reversal was finalized, things were quiet. Emily started bringing the kids over again. At first, it felt stiff. Polite conversations, surface-level updates, no deep talks. I noticed something, though. She wasn't as confident anymore. The tone had shifted. She no longer assumed and she asked. And that small difference told me everything. But I knew something else too. If I didn't change something structurally, we would eventually end up in the same situation again. Because patterns repeat when systems don't change. So I made an appointment with an estate planning attorney. Not the same one from court. A specialist. And this time, I walked in prepared. I created a revocable living trust. Not because I'm planning to die tomorrow, not because I don't love my daughter, but because clarity prevents chaos. The trust clearly states, I retain full control of my home during my lifetime. The property cannot be transferred, refinanced, or leveraged without my written directive. Upon my passing, the house will be sold and the proceeds placed into structured accounts for my grandchildren. Not directly to Emily. Yes, you heard that right. I skipped her. Not out of revenge, out of protection. If you think that's harsh, stay with me, and if you believe protecting your life's work isn't selfish, subscribe. When I told Emily about the trust, she was quiet, very quiet. So, you don't trust me, she finally said. I took a deep breath. I trust you to love me. I don't trust financial pressure to never influence you again. That sentence took everything in me to say calmly. Because I wasn't attacking her character. I was acknowledging human weakness. We all have it. Stress changes people. Fear changes people. And I will never again make a legal decision based purely on emotion. She looked hurt, but she didn't argue. And that told me something important. And she knew she had crossed a line. We can't erase what happened, but we can design safeguards so it doesn't happen again. And that's what I did. Now here's the part I wrestled with for months. Did I forgive her? The honest answer? Partially. I forgave her desperation. I forgave her fear. I did not forget her strategy. Forgiveness doesn't require amnesia. It requires wisdom. If you've ever forgiven someone but kept the lesson, you understand exactly what I mean. Subscribe. If you believe love without boundaries eventually turns into resentment, there's one more thing I haven't told you. A few weeks ago, Emily sat at this same kitchen table, the table where I signed those original papers, and said something unexpected. I never thought you'd fight me. That sentence has stayed with me because what she meant was, she never thought I'd prioritize myself. And maybe that's my responsibility too. For years, I taught her that I would sacrifice anything for her. And she believed it. So when I finally didn't, it shocked her. Sometimes we unintentionally train people to overstep, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is surprise them. Today, I still live in this house. The oak tree Daniel planted is taller than ever. The kitchen hasn't been renovated, and I have zero plans to downsize. But I live differently now, stronger, more aware, less afraid of uncomfortable conversations, and more protective of my peace. If you're over 50, or even 30, hear me clearly. Do not add anyone to your deed. Without independent legal advice, do not sign documents because someone says, trust me. And do not confuse love with obligation. Now I want to ask you something. Was I right to take her to court? Was I wrong to structure the trust the way I did? If you were in my place, 62 years old, widowed, financially stable, but emotionally vulnerable, what would you have done? Would you have refinanced to help her? Sold the house? Or fought like I did? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone in your own life, subscribe, because real stories like this deserve real conversations. This was my truth. Now I want to hear yours.